In order to see this, let's create a new project, also a console application, and we're going to call this one Static Demo. We need two classes, the main class, which is called Program, and then we need a second class. So let's go up to the project and say Add Class, and we're going to call this class Temperature Converter. Now we have a new class, Temperature Converter, and we're going to give it a couple methods. The first, which will return a double, is going to be called Celsius to Fahrenheit. It will take a string representing the temperature in Celsius, or centigrade if you prefer, and it will create a local variable Celsius by taking the string temp Celsius and parsing it into a double. It will then create a local variable Fahrenheit, which it will set to taking the Celsius value, multiplying it by 9/5. And then, because multiplication and division have precedence over addition, we'll put that in parentheses, and we'll say plus 32, which is the formula for conversion. And we will return Fahrenheit, that is the Celsius value now in Fahrenheit. Let's make the mirror image of that, which would be Fahrenheit to Celsius. It too will take a string, which we will call temp Fahrenheit, and within Fahrenheit to Celsius, we are going to create a Fahrenheit variable, which we will populate by parsing the string that was passed in into a double, just as we did above. We will now calculate the Celsius value and put that into a local variable. We subtract 32 and multiply by 5/9, and we'll return that value. We now have two utility methods, Celsius to Fahrenheit and Fahrenheit to Celsius. Let's return to our program, and here we'll create a demo of using our two utilities. In order to do that, we want to create a little menu. So let's start with a string selection and initialize that to an empty string. We'll create a while loop, saying while that string is not equal to lowercase q and that selection is not equal to uppercase Q. So as long as we don't have a Q, we're going to continue in this loop. We're going to prompt the user to enter a C for Celsius, or to enter an F for Fahrenheit to Celsius, or to enter a Q to quit. Now let's change that right line to a right, because we don't want it to be creating a new line. We want it to have that prompt and then wait for the user's input on the same line. We'll populate our selection string by calling console readline. Let's create a couple local variables of type double, Fahrenheit and Celsius, and initialize them to 0. And now we're ready to set up our switch statement based on the selection that the user entered. If the user entered a capital C, or the user entered a lowercase c, we're going to take the same action. And that action is to call the console write function and prompt the user to enter a temperature in Celsius. In order to make the conversion, we're going to need an instance of our temperature converter class, which we'll call converter. And we'll new that up. Once we have our converter, we can set our local variable Fahrenheit by using the converter to call Celsius to Fahrenheit. And we'll pass in whatever value we read from the console. We can then write to the console the value that we just computed using that converter. And that will display the Fahrenheit, and that :F2 will control the display so that we have a decimal value displayed. Our next case is if the user enters an F or a lowercase f. In that case, they want to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Let's copy what we have, drop it in, and then we will adjust. So we're going to ask them for the Fahrenheit temperature, not the Celsius temperature. Once again, we need an instance of the temperature converter, But since converter itself has already been declared, we can take out the initial declaration. But in either case, we are still creating a new instance of temperature converter. Now we're going to call Fahrenheit to Celsius on the temperature converter, and then display the newly computed temperature in Celsius. Key here is that in each case we needed to create an instance of the temperature converter. Now we have a little bit of house cleaning to do. We want to handle the quit case, and that's going to be handled by the loop. So we can just do a break here with no body to the case statement. And we have a default case, in which case we display please try again. Let's run that. And we see that we're prompted for Celsius or Fahrenheit. We'll say Fahrenheit for the first time. Please enter a Fahrenheit temperature. So we'll enter 212, the boiling point, and it immediately tells us that that is 100 in Celsius. Similar, if we say Celsius, it asks for a Celsius temperature. We can say 0, the freezing point, and we get back 32 degrees Fahrenheit. When we hit Q, we exit the program. Let's return to examining the usage, and note, as I pointed out earlier, that in each case we need to make an instance of the temperature converter class. And we're making that instance only to then call a single method, and we no longer need that instance. This is a bit error prone, and there's a fair amount of duplication. If we go to our temperature converter class and mark the methods static, then you will remember that they are quote-unquote on the class rather than on an instance of the class, on an object. That means that we can go back to our program and eliminate the temperature converter instance altogether, and instead use the class name followed by a dot, and there's our static method. So you can see that the method is now being called on the class rather than on that instant. And we can do the same thing under the second choice, Fahrenheit. So we now are no longer creating an instance of the class each time we want to use it, and we have a single line of code rather than two. When we run this, we get precisely the same results. If we type F for Fahrenheit and put in 212, we get 100. If we type C for Celsius and put in 0, we get 32.